Well, in the last session we were looking at the whole reality of unreached people groups, and we broke up into groups, and some questions that we had were how many ethnic people groupings are there in the heart of the Pacific? Well, you should be able to go through a lot. Samoan, Tongan, Niuean, Tahitian. You know, there's a whole group that will automatically come to mind. But then you go to the nation of Fiji, it's not just the Fijians. You're finding there's actually a whole lot of people from China living there now as well. And there's a whole lot of Hindu people living within the tribal groups within Fiji. And so an unreached people group within Fiji would be the Hindu people in Fiji. And so the strategic thing is that for the church now is to actually get the indigenous church of Fiji to redeploy and target the Hindu people within Fiji. We talk about E1, E2, E3 barriers. Well, they don't have to get on a plane to go there because they might have to get a canoe or to go from one island to the other, but there's generally not much of a cultural gap. Linguistically, they're probably all speaking the same dialects, but different backgrounds, but we have to take the gospel to the Hindu people within Fiji. So the priority really for the church is to be strategic, not being a light to itself, it's actually taking the light of the gospel where the gospel needs to go. And so we're seeing an incredible redeployment of the church globally. And I think part of the Pacific to Nation initiative that we're seeing now is the church rise up. And they don't want to get involved in the same old, same old. We're having young people want to get involved in cutting edge missions, and they go into where these unreached people groups are. And this partnership with the emerging church. The emerging church is the church that are in these remote nations. And it's not like the great white missionary is going in there and doing it all by himself. There's a partnership with the indigenous church and the sending churches around the world. And we're seeing incredible acceleration of God doing things in those nations. Well, what we're seeing is God is intent about taking the gospel to those nations. On the slide behind me, you'll see the world has really got about 7.4 billion people currently in. There's many different people groups within that worldview. And then we hone it right down and we see that a good portion of that is still unreached. Around about 2.4 billion people still haven't been reached with the gospel. And we hone this right down and we see that a good portion or a large portion of this is still in what they call the unengaged people groups. The church hasn't been intentionally engaging a thrust to this unreached unreached people groups of the world. They reckon there's around about 3,250 people group in that block alone. And so we're seeing a redeployment strategically into these unreached or least engaged or unengaged people groups of the world. People have been very serious about that. And as time goes on, we're seeing a rapid closure of what God is doing. If we look at the global maps of the world, we see large clusters of ethnicity, people group, humanity in different blocks of the world. And we see, for example, Islam, generally from the Middle East all the way through Pakistan, through into Indonesia. There's a heavy concentration of Islamic or Muslim people. God loves the Muslim people. And I've got many friends who are Islam, and they're reaching out to God. And we have to take our faith, our knowledge of God to these people. And they're crying out to a prophet in the Quran, which is Jesus. And they're responding to him in a favourable way. But we see different cluster groups, not just Muslim, we're seeing Buddhist, all the way through Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, up into China. There's large cluster groups of Buddhist people. So we're putting like a secondary lens on seeing the world, not just ethnic groupings, we're seeing religious blocks of people. We're seeing Hindu people. Well, we understand the Hindu faith essentially comes from India. But the Hindu people are great traders, and you'll see them go to the nations of the world. You go to Singapore, you go to Kuala Lumpur, you go to Fiji. There's Fijians everywhere, Indians everywhere in those nations. But also we have to understand that the gospel has gone. And through the years with commercialisation, with travel, with commerce, the gospel and the church has been established in the nations of the world. But as we look, there's a heavily concentrated area of the world where the gospel still hasn't got to. It's called the 1040 window. You'll see this on the PowerPoint slide. It's where most of the world's population base is established. But we're seeing change take place, a rapid change take place. We think of nations like Indonesia, a big map, lots of islands, hundreds and hundreds of islands. Well, one island, Borneo, is one of the largest islands in the world. But in the heart of that island, there's many, many tribes, tribal people groups. The people groups there are generally called Dayak. Dayak actually means tribal people. And there's different tribal groups within that island. There's around about 720 tribal groups. Bring it down, because there's obviously major groups and smaller groups. There's around about 200 major cluster groups where the gospel has to go. And we're seeing through the years how missionaries have come, and they used to target the people that lived around the coastal rims of the island, because traders came in their boats and the gospel went to the foreshores of the island. And then they started to get in canoes and they used to go up the rivers and they took their faith further into the interior. And that's what's been happening. It's been a work in progress over the last 200 odd years. But still these people have been hearing, some have responded very quickly, and other people have been resistant. But there's a whole new generation rising up, and we're seeing a thrust of the gospel into the interiors before. Some of the tribal groups that are there are actually called unreachable people groups because it's just too hard to take the gospel there because they're headhunters and they're violent. But I tell you what, the gospel is slowly permeating. It's getting into some of these people groups, and it's happening really, really quickly. I was doing a seminar recently in the heart of the jungles there, and missionaries have come and God's given clear mandate to go and set up ministry bases. Well, if we're sending teams out of people into the world, we want to send you out into safe locations. We have a number of contacts on the field. We're not saying join this organisation or that organisation, but we can connect you to various mission agencies and churches and denominational initiatives or missionaries that are actually already established on the field. There's one ministry group right in the heart of Borneo where it's just 10, 15 years ago, it was absolute jungle. But now we're seeing accommodation and schools and medical clinics being established. We're getting training, vocational things set up so the local people have actually got employment. This place is changing rapidly. Once it was an island with big trees and the forestry people have come in and the trees have been chopped down, so people have been forced out of their villages because the trees aren't there anymore. They're having to go to city centres for education because the kids need schooling. And so we're putting a ministry base right in the heart of this place where people can come for schooling so they don't have to go far from their villages. But essentially, it's a safe place to train and reach out to people. And if we're sending teams of people into the nations of the world, we want to make sure you've got good accommodation, eating the right food. And so you don't just go once and die. You don't have to go home. You can actually go and come home and come again. And we're seeing teams and teams of people from around the world come and partner with the missionaries to help them do the job. And the real reason for being there is for the task remaining. It's to get the gospel into those tribal groups where the gospel still hasn't permeated yet. There's a people group called the Duhoi people, Central Kalimantan, Central Borneo. The gospel has permeated a little bit, but I tell you what, there's a stirring up of the people and they're asking all these amazing questions. And the young generations that are rising up are saying, help, we need your partnership because we haven't got this experience or skill set to be able to help these people. And they come with sincere questions. we had a situation recently where a man, a leader in a village said, "Hey, I've got a problem, can you help me?" And the problem was that they wanted to set up, someone wanted to come and set up this massive great Hindu mosque, a Hindu temple. And they said, "That's wrong, we shouldn't be doing that." But what do you say to these people? Because all these other tribal people have got pressures coming on them, and the world is coming because of commercialisation, and the loggers are coming in, and all of a sudden the work crews are coming, and they want to come in and they want to set up their temple in your village. What would you say to them? Can you do that? And I said, you'd have to be very wise. And long story short, they see what God's doing in the heart of the church, a healthy church, and they're seeing a few miracles or signs and wonders take place, and people's faith is stimulated and they respond to the gospel. Very easy to establish a church there. Situation happened where this head man was asked to put this Hindu temple in. Well, he got saved, his whole family got saved within about 6 weeks. Not just one or two people, his entire family and his neighbours and his cousins and his uncles and all his relatives got saved. And I met this man recently, and in a short period of time, it was less than a year, he said, well, they're actually asking us to start 7 new churches there now. You know, phenomenal things have taken place because the gospel is opening up like never before. But the Indigenous church is saying, can you partner with us? And we see that a number of churches are now saying, well, where do we start? Well, we want to position you into places where you can actually learn a bit of culture. It's a safe place. You start to work with the children, some of the emerging leaders, but then you can go and stand alongside some of these new church planters that are actually doing church. They need help. They need your help. It's a great place. You don't have to be to Bible college for 4 years. You know, you can be a young person just sharing your testimony, your story. It makes an incredible impact on these people's lives. So the task remaining is critical. We're finding that the local leaders are crying out for help. Pastor Louis and I were in Jayapura in Indonesia, and this is a photograph of an old couple. They were there during the Japanese occupation during the Second World War, and this land where their house was is actually where General MacArthur had his headquarters, and there was lots of killings. There were thousands of people killed in this area, and this old couple, they'd survived that. But they've been getting up for 15 odd years, and they're praying from about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning through to 1 o'clock, 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And they've been doing that for many, many years now. And their heart is that God would reach their nation, that God would raise up people to be able to help reach into their nation. And before our very eyes, we're seeing this take place. Louis and I visited this couple, and we asked them to share their story, and you can hear their heart, and they're saying, can you come? Can you partner with us? We want to see our land set apart as a training ground to be able to reach people. Can you put radio up to be able to take the gospel to the people around us, because it's very hilly and the radio waves will get there? Now, God has been very strategic, and God is stirring people. You know, our challenge is, would you like to stand alongside some of these emerging church leaders? These people have been faithful. They're crying out for God's help. But I believe through these short-term mission trips, you'll get engaged. You'll get on the wave. You'll engage with what God is doing. Cindy Jacobs said, out of the heart of the Pacific, there would be a movement of God take place. She said that the charismatic renewal, there was a move of God that took place. But that move of God was aborted. But God is going to give the nations a second chance. And you'll find that it will burn out of the heart of the Pacific, and it would burn around the Pacific Rim. And it would start with the mountain people. And then she said there will be plane loads of missionaries getting on planes and going into the nations of the world. And that prophecy was around about 15 years ago now. But we're seeing now, before our very eyes, an emergence of people from the heart of the Pacific. It's like a burning is coming in the heart of the churches, and we're seeing it erupt out of the heart of the Pacific. It's burning around the Pacific rims. Why? Because it's taking the gospel into the heart of the nations. It's young people, it's old people, it's educated, uneducated, it's students with debt. You know, they've got their education, but they've got big student loans. They're saying, we don't want to go to Europe anymore. We want to get involved in the Great Commission. And so we want to continue to challenge you that there are many opportunities that are going to be incredibly impacting for your life. That is going to change you, it's going to change your lifestyle. It'll be like a Holy Ghost virus that injects you, that you've got, that will change you for life. Well, here are some questions that you probably would like to just break up again, and we'll just get you to break up and just take the next, maybe 5 minutes, probably no more than that, and ask these questions. How can the established church be more strategic in reaching unreached people groups? Say that again. So how can the established church that we have now, your church, my church, be more strategic in reaching unreached people groups? And does this mean there has to be a redeployment of our missionaries? So obviously we've had lots of work with the missionaries up until now, but is there going to have to be a redeployment of some of these missionaries? And if so, why? And then what role does the emerging church have in reaching the lost? How can we partner with the emerging church in some of these nations? So God bless you. Have some fun.